All right. Good morning. Today's daf is Daf Nun Zayin in Maseches Avodah Zarah. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. We are a couple days now into the discussion of Yayin Nesech. We had it earlier in the Maseches, and now we've got really sort of like the details of it. And in particular, we're talking about the rabbinic prohibition associated with a non-Jew who touches wine, and the fact that that wine now becomes prohibited to benefit from. And the question that we were dealing with at the end of the day yesterday is, to what extent did that happen if the touching was accidental? Either the person didn't know that he was touching wine, or the person knew that they were touching wine, but they didn't mean to touch. They weren't trying to touch. So we're going to be dealing with that over the next few days. And so, continuing to deal with these issues of a non-Jew who touches wine. So we are on the sixth line. Let me just see if there's anything else in the introduction that I needed to mention that I didn't mention. Yeah, we had two cases yesterday. In particular, which highlighted that when a non-Jew touches wine with his hands, one's not allowed to benefit from the wine. If he touches the wine only with his feet, then although a Jew can no longer drink the wine, the Jew can continue to benefit from the wine. And this benefit can be either getting paid to crush the wine or with the non-Jew, or selling the wine to non-Jews. And so as we pick up on the sixth line of Nun Zayin Amud Aleph, the Gemara discusses the case where the wine is touched by something being held by the non-Jew. So the non-Jew is not even touching it with his own skin, he's touching it with something else. And so we're going to see what's the story with that. Now, I will note ahead of time that Tosfos disagrees and creates a whole new alternative understanding of the Gemara that we're dealing with, that removes the whole reference to the item being held, and it says that this is also an accidental touching case. But in any event, let's take a look and see what the Gemara that we have in front of us says and how Rashi understands it. So Ahu Uvda, there was a certain circumstance, Dahava Beviram, where they were in the city of Biram. And this non-Jew was climbing up a palm tree. And he was getting a lulav branch. When he was on his way down, Naga Barosha de Luluve, the tip of the lulav hit Bechamra Shalo Bekavana, hit into some wine accidentally. And it wasn't on purpose, so it was an accidental touching, and it wasn't him that touched it, it was the tip of the lulav. Sharye Rav lezabune la'avdei kochavim. So Rav said, you know what? Even though you can't drink it, the Jews can no longer drink it, you can sell it. So the point is it is subject into the overall umbrella of Yayin Nesach, but it's not subject to the most strict prohibition of Yayin Nesach, which says that you can't even benefit from it. Amrulei Rav Kahana v'Rav Asi l'Rav. But Rav Kahana and Rav Asi said to Rav, V'hamar huda amar. But 1 second, you yourself say, Tino ben Yomo hu ose Yayin Nesach, that if a child touches wine, an infant, even 1 day old, touches wine, that wine becomes Yayin Nesach. So that we see from this that the intention doesn't matter. And so if intention doesn't matter, maybe we would say that the same rule would apply to when I touch it with the lulav and when I touch it with my hand. Now, Tosfos, based on the fact that it seems like there should be a very big difference between my indirect touching and my direct touching, therefore can't understand how this question could apply in this context, and therefore says that actually he removes the reference to lulav completely and says that we're not dealing with lulav at all, and we're dealing with a direct touching case, a case where the guy was climbing down and he himself accidentally touched the wine on his way down.
Still sell it.
And the point is that Rav said that you could sell it, but you can't drink it.
Correct.
And the question that that Rav Kahana and Rav Asi were asking is, what's the difference? You say that this baby who touches it is going to be a problem. And now you're telling us that this adult male who climbs down a tree and accidentally touches is not a problem. So how can that be? So Amr lahu Amor de Amri Ana B'Shasiya. 1 second. When I was talking about that baby, was I saying that you couldn't drink it? No, I say I was only saying that you couldn't drink it. Bahana Amri, was I talking about benefit? No, I wasn't talking about benefit. And so as a result, the point is that according to Rav, according to the way we're understanding the Gemara at the moment, Rav says that in fact, if it's an accidental touching, the person did not intend to touch the wine.
Correct.
The non-Jew did not intend to touch the wine, then it is okay to benefit from the wine, but you cannot drink the wine. And that is true based on Rashi and according to the simple read of our Gemara. And that's true even if you touch the wine indirectly with the tip of the lulav. And so as a result, that's the way Rashi understands it. And again, Tosfos says no, it can't be with the lulav. It's got to be not with the lulav. And so and takes out the lulav from this discussion. Now, Tosfos also asks another question. Well, actually, let's take a look first at Rashi, right? We say Tinoch ben Yomo, 1, 2, 3. This is from the top of the narrow lines in Rashi. It's the sixth narrow line on Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. Tinoch ben Yomo, Alma lo be'inan kavana. The bottom line is that we see from this that you don't need kavana at all. And so, therefore, that's got to, and so that's why Rav Asi and Rav Kahana use this to ask a question to Rav, because you just said that you can sell it, and we thought that maybe you can't have any benefit. And so Rav explains that when he says that even a 1-day-old infant, if he touches the wine, makes it such that you can't, that it's yayin nesech. What he's means by that is only you can't drink it, but you would be able to, sell it. Okay, so having now mentioned this law, let's now do the Tosfos. The Tosfos, second to last Tosfos on the daf. Tinoch ben Yomo ose yayin nesech. Perish v'asar b'shtiya, and we explain that this means that you cannot drink, that the baby's touching of the wine means that you can't drink it. V'im tomar kaven derab posik l'kaman keRebbi Shimon. Now, we are going to see the halacha of Rebbi Shimon. We mentioned this halacha yesterday, and it's a great story, right? It's the story of a non-Jew who falls into a vat of wine and comes out, and obviously he did not mean to fall into that wine. And Rabbi Shimon says that you're allowed to drink that wine. And Rav agrees with him. So Ma'ishna Tinoch ben Yomo. So why is it different? A baby who touches the wine, why is that different from the case of Nafa Labor, of a case where the person falls into the cistern, exactly. V'Allah, and then comes out of it. Deshari Rabbi Shimon. That Rabbi Shimon in that situation says it's permitted. And so as a result, Tosfos distinguishes between two kind of mentalities. There's a mentality of touching, but I did it accidentally. And there's a concept of not even meaning to touch
the baby.
No. So when the baby touches v'yesh lomar desaver debemaga tinok v'shikashko, that when the baby touches it and moves the wine around, ikala migzar, where we have to make a gzeira, that we're worried that if we allow the baby case, then we will come atu gadol, we'll come to allow the grown-up to move the wine and say that it's permitted. And so as a result, even when the baby touches it, even though the baby's touch is sort of completely accidental, because we want to make sure that we are careful about an adult affirmatively touching and moving the wine, we're going to say that even the baby's not going to be problematic. But aval nafal labor, but when somebody falls into the cistern, milsa de anis, it's clear the person didn't mean to do it at all. The whole thing was accidental. And so as a result, lo shayach lemigzar midu. And so as a result, when the whole thing is accidental and there's no intention whatsoever, so then we're not going to make a gzeira at all.
As a lawyer, you could certainly make a case for the baby.
100%. You can absolutely.
You would take that case in a second.
100%. I would make the opposite case. And so you're absolutely right that Tosfos is essentially coming to the conclusion based on the Gemara and not necessarily, saying, well, this is what I think it should be outside. But anyways, that's an interesting question that Tosfos asks. Okay.
So that would be the baby touching it with the fingers or the hands.
Yes, correct.
The baby fell down on it or bumped into it with his back, then it would be like falling into the bore, right?
That's a good question. It certainly seems like it should be that would be treated the same way. 100%. I think so.
Graces with the baby.
Yeah. Exactly. 100%. A whole other story. Okay. So we are now, first wide line of the Gemara on Nun Zayin Amud Aleph, and we are analyzing now Rav's statement about the one-day-old child. So Gufa, Amar Rav says, Tinok ben Yomo ose yayin nesech, that if he touches the wine, it becomes yayin nesech, and so as a result, we have to be very careful about anybody touching wine. So Esve Rav Shimi bar Chia l'Rav. So Rav Shimi bar Chia asked Rav from the following question, because we have a following brisa. If you buy a slave and the slave has now let me back up and just note, when you buy a slave from a non-Jew, that slave is going to be subject to all of the non-time bound mitzvot. The slave that is owned by a Jew, and even if the slave, and especially we're talking about a slave who wasn't Jewish before he was owned by a Jew.
Right.
So we're not talking about a Jewish slave who's a slave for a certain number of years, etc., and has special rules associated with it. We're dealing with somebody that you own the person. This is pre-1860s. So the point is that there was an obligation to convert the person. The person needed to have Mila, if he was male, and Tevila, and to go into the mikvah. And from that point on, they were considered, on some level, Jewish. Right. They were subject to all the mitzvot that don't have a time-bound component, just like women are subject to those mitzvot, not to make an analogy at all. So the point is that here we have a situation where you bought the slave, and he did have Mila, but velo tavlu, but he did not yet have the tefillah. He did not go into the mikveh yet. V'chein b'nei hashvachos shemalu velo tavlu. And similarly, and let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi tells us a little bit more about this case. Shemalu velo tavlu. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 lines up from the bottom, and it's I guess 7 lines down from the top. So shemalu velo tavlu dekaimelan b'yavamos, because we have the rule in Yavamos laolam eino ger. When you have somebody who's converting, they are not converted ad sheyimol v'yitpol. You need to have both Mila and Tvila. You need both the circumcision and you need them to go to the mikvah. And until both of those happen, the person's not Jewish. And so as a result, we're going to eventually come to the question of them touching wine. But before we get to that, we say, V'chein b'nei back into the Gemara, second wide line, end of the line. And similarly, if you have a maidservant who is owned by a Jew, so her child is and Rashi tells us that the situation is where she did not finish her conversion before the child was born. And so now the child is also going to need to be both Mila and Tvila, as opposed to just Mila. And so, and yet this child had Mila but did not have yet Tvila. So, Ruchan umidrasan bashuk tame. If they spit or they sit on something in the marketplace, that item is considered tameh, and it's because we treat a non-Jew just like somebody who is a zav. That is a kind of tuma when somebody has an emission that isn't a traditional emission, that they are subject to that kind of tuma that is a very strict tuma. And as Rashi says, if we turn to the top of Nun Zayin Amabet, B'shuk, afilu b'shuk. The point is that even in the marketplace, we're going to see that this is the law. She'ein tumasan safek ela tumasan vada'it midrabanan. It is not just an uncertain tuma, but rather it is a certain tuma from the rabbinically. Shegazru al ha'ovdei kochavim, because there was a decree made about non-Jews, sheyehu kizavin l'chol divrei, that they should be treated in order to sort of keep degrees of separation from Jews and non-Jews in those days when we were very careful about making sure that our food and everything stayed tahor, and if it became tameh, we would do what was necessary in order to cleanse it, in order to make it tahor again. So in those days, a non-Jew, if they was treated like a zav. So the point is that that this person who is in the process of becoming Jewish is going to be treated as tameh. Now the Gemara quickly puts an aside, va'amrila, and some people say that the language of this brisa is tahor, is not tameh, that this person who is partially converted effectively is actually tahor. But that isn't in any way what we need the reason that we're bringing this brisa. What we're bringing this brisa for is this next piece. Yenan. So now we have the
I'm sorry, where was the Rashi you quoted?
What?
I'm looking for that Rashi you just
The
quoted.
Rashi is on the top of Nun Zayin Amabet. It's the first Rashi on Nun Zayin Amabet. So the Amri Yenam, because the language is going to be quoted again down below, and that's why the Rashi is there. But the Rashi really could apply even here, and that's why I went to it now. So anyway, Yenam. What about the wine of these partially converted Jews? Gedolim osin yein nesech. That when it comes to adults, they make yayin nesech. And katanim einosim yayin nesech. So if you have these slaves that are in the process of converting, meaning that they're not quite a Jewish slave yet, a slave of a Jew yet, that has fully become subject to all of the mitzvot. So then we're going to say that if they're an adult, they can make it yayin nesech. If they're not an adult, they can't. The Eluhen Gedol and the Eluhen Ketanim. Well, what's the age? Meaning, how do you determine whether somebody's an adult or a child? It's not going to be bar mitzvah, which applies to Jews, because these people aren't Jews. Gedolim Yodin Betiv Avodas Kochavim Umishamesheha. So an adult is somebody who knows well how to understand the worship of idols and all of the services that are associated with it. And kananim einam yodim b'tiv avodas kochavim mishmashmeha. And the minors are those who don't have those details. So katani miyah. But at the bottom line is, what did we see? We see that there is a group, these minors, who katanim miyas gedolim ein katanim lo, that the minors don't make yayin nesech. And yet you, Rav, what did you say? You said even a 1-day-old infant can make yayin nesech. So how can you say that a 1-day-old infant makes yayin nesech when it says clearly in this brisa that somebody who's a minor cannot make yayin nesech?
Yeah, but he isn't on the way to conversion, though. He hasn't done part of the.
Excellent point. That's true. It's interesting that we don't answer that, because you could have made that distinction, that this person is on their way. But the point is that they are on their way, but it's we end up saying that effectively, even if they just had Mila without Tvila, and especially in the slave situation because they are effectively being converted against their will. So that could also be a reason why it would be more like the typical case, because essentially they haven't finished the conversion, and so as a result, it's essentially like they're nothing. But in any event, that's not how we're going to answer it, but rather tirgama abnei shvachot, that the point is that we're dealing the situation where we say that the adults make yayin nesach and the minors do not. That is only in the bnei shvachot situation. It is not where it is the child is the child of a maidservant who's already owned by a Jew. And so as a result, that child is growing up in a Jewish household. And so as a result, because he's growing up in a Jewish household, if he's a child, we're going to say that we're not worried about it. But if he's adult, we're going to say that we are worried about, because he's still not gone to the mikveh. But 1 second though, how can you say a different rule for the child of the maidservant from the versus the slave that one were to purchase? V'havachein ka'amar, the Brisa itself says that the same rule applies to both situations. No, arokan umidrasan. That when it says that the same rule applies to both situations, that's with respect to the spit and what they sit on. It is not with respect to the fact that they touch yayin nesach. And the rule about yayin nesach is only for the child of a maidservant that is owned by a Jew. But so 1 second though, hanich laman amar tame. That can work according to the person who reads the word tame into the brisa, because when you have the word tame in the brisa, we can understand why the brisa needs to tell us both about the slave that you buy and the slave that is born in your house, because I might have thought, fine, the slave that you buy, but the slave that's born in your house, maybe it shouldn't be tame. But elamanda amar tahor, my ikalamemar. But according to the one who says that the situation is that the baby is tahor, well, then why do we need to mention both categories at all? If you tell me that we're talking about the slave that you buy, I will know for sure that the baby in the house is tahor. So we don't need to combine these two rules and then and confuse us by saying one rule that applies to both and another rule that applies to one. We could just separate them completely and have two different brises effectively. So no, hakamashmalan. Here is why the brisa, even though the brisa is telling us two different rules, and we could have separated them into a rule about avadim that you buy, saying that they're tahor, and avadim that grow up in your house, saying that they don't make yayin nesach when they're a katan, but they make yayin nesach when they're a gadol. We could have separated them, but we wanted to bring those two rules together. And why? Hakamashmalan. Here's why I wanted to bring those rules together. Avadim dumya divnei shvachot. Because I wanted to tell you that slaves that you buy are similar to slaves that are born in your house to a maidservant. So how are they similar? Ma b'nei shvachos malu v'lo tavlu hu de osin yein nesech malu v'tavlu lo af avadim king. Well, the point is when it comes to a slave that is born in your house, it is completely clear that once that slave has both done mila, circumcision, and done tefillah, and gone to the mikvah, it is clear that they are considered a Jew and will not make anything yayin nesech. And what we want to tell you is that if somebody were to buy a slave out in the marketplace from a non-Jew, and that slave does both mila, circumcision, and go the mikvah, and goes to the mikvah, so then and tefillah, and goes to the mikvah and immerses in the mikvah, so that slave is also not going to have any concept of yayin nesach at all, because they are effectively become a Jew. Well, that seems kind of obvious.
That's obvious.
Who would say that that's not true? So that's where the Gemara explains with the next piece. La'apuke mid Rav Nachman. It's telling us specifically that it's not like Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, who said in the name of Shmuel. Because what did Rav Nachman say in the name of Shmuel? To Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, Halokech Avodah min ha'ovdei kochavim. If you buy a slave from a non-Jew, and in particular from an idolater, even though they did both the Mila and the Tefillah, they are still, because their origination was seeped in idol worship, we are worried that they are going to continue their idol worshiping attitudes, and therefore we are worried that they will make something yayin nesech, they will do the libations, even though they're now officially a Jew. We're worried about it. And therefore, what is this brisa coming to teach us according to Rav? Kamash Malan Dilo. And so this brisa, by combining a brisa that talks both about a slave that you buy in the marketplace and a slave that you that is born to a maidservant in your home, and comparing the fact of the case of Mila with no Tvila, of those two situations, it is telling us that when you have Mila and Tvila, in both of those situations, they're not going to make Yayin Nesech. That is how Rav reads this brisa.
Yeah.
We are now going to go through.
How can you ask? I mean, that would all, if one were to hold the position that perhaps even though the person underwent Mila and Tevila, it was a gadol, how could you hold that maybe that we're concerned that he may go back to his old practice? What's the whole point of conversion then?
No. It's important to remember that this conversion is against the person's will. And so as a result, he may not have any interest in Judaism, but he's been bought by a Jew, and now he's being forced to do Mila, forced to do Tvila. And now the question is, do we treat them as a Jew with respect to that when they touch wine? Now, obviously, if they touch wine and actually do a libation, there's no question that's going to be wine that's prohibited to benefit from. The question is what if they just touch the wine? Do we need to be worried that they are coming to it with that idol worshiping mentality? And Shmuel says yes, and Rav says no. And Rav says that our brisa that we just quoted supports and proves the fact that the answer is no. And so now what we're about to do, what the Gemara is going to do, is go back to Shmuel and understand Shmuel's statement. First, we're going to say, Gufa, Amar of, so let's pick up. We're now.
So you want to say it's under duress, and it doesn't even count. Then the conversion doesn't count.
It counts because remember, a year later, once he's accustomed to being a Jew, we are not going to presume any longer that what he touches is Yayin Nesech. So that it's important to understand that. And there's a debate, by the way,
where do you get this idea of a year later? Why is it not 2 years later or 6 years later?
Because we're about to get to it.
Oh.
So give me 2 seconds. So we're 4 lines up, 4 words into the line. Gufa. Amar of Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Halokech Avodah min ha'ovdei kochavim, Afal pi shemalu v'tavlu, osin yayin nesech ad shetishka avodas kochavim mepiyim. That until their mouths stop engaging in idolatry, that's going to be when they will no longer touch wine and make it automatically yayin nesech. V'kama, how long is that? Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, ad shnei masar chodesh. It's going to take 12 months. After 12 months, you're going to have the rule. And it's interesting. I understand that this source of the 12 months it has a concept of we worry about people forgetting about things, that this 12 months may be the basis for when you make the bracha of Mechayim Mesim. If you haven't seen somebody in 12 months, it's a basis for a number of other situations. But the bottom line is that we say after 12 months, a person becomes accustomed to the new situation and therefore is going to know that slave is no longer going to make anything yayin nesech. So now Eisvei Rabba Rav Nachman. So Rabba asked Rav Nachman, listen, now we're going to cite our entire brisa again and basically say, listen, we just had Rav's read of this brisa, and Rav's read of this brisa completely disagrees with your understanding. Okay, and so that's what we're going to do. So rukan umidrasan, as we turn to Nun Zayin Amabet, b'shuk tamei. So again, whether it's a slave that you buy or a slave that is born in your house, if they've done a mila with no tvila, they make things tamei. Tahor, and some people say no, that's not the right read, but it's tahor, and that's of course again that part of the brisa not directly relevant to us because it's not talking about the wine. But Yenan, when it comes to their wine, gedolim osin yain nesek, ptanim ein osin yain nesek. The adults make yain nesek, and the children do not. So elu hein gedolim ve'elu hein katanim, and which ones are adults and which ones are not? Gedolim sheyodim b'tov avos kochavim u'mishamsheha, and so an adult knows how to serve the worship and worship idols. Katanim she'ein yodim b'tiv avodas kochavim u'mishamsheha, and the minors do not. So katanim mias malu below tavlu in malu b'tavlu low. Well, what's the implication of this whole brisa? The whole brisa is focused solely on situations where you had mila and not tvila. And the implication is if you had mila and tvila, even if you were bought by a Jew from a non-Jew, you would be treated as a full-fledged Jew and not make yayin nesech. So doesn't this completely disagree with you, Shmuel? How could you say what you're saying? So just like Rav, Targama Abnei Shvachos, Shmuel offers his initial answer in connection with this brisa is the exact same, is saying, you know what? When the end of the brisa talks about wine, it is only talking about the case of the baby slave that was born in your house. That baby slave is a situation where if you had mila and no tvila, then it would be potentially make yayin nesech. But once that baby has both mila and tvila, because it was born in the Jewish house and not bought from an idolater, so as a result, that one is going to, mila and tvila is going to be sufficient. But v'havachein Tani, 1 second though, we had the same question that we asked according to Rav. It says in that brisa that the same rule applies both to the slaves that you purchase and the slaves that that are born within your household. So how can you say that the wine piece is only applying to the slaves that are born within your household? No, Arukano Midrasan, exact same answer, that when it comes to the same rule applying both to the slave that you purchase and to the slave that's born in your house, when it's talking about a slave who has done Mila and not Tvila, so we're talking about only the laws of the spit and the Midrash and the sitting on something. But when you're talking about the Yayin, that only applies to the baby born within the house, the slave born within the house. But 1 second, Hanich Laman de Amar Tameh, that works according to the person who says it's Tameh, because then you need to tell me that the both cases are Tameh, because I might have thought that only the one that you buy is Tameh and not the one that's born in your house. But now, if you're telling Elaman de Amar Tahor, my Ikalamemer, but once you tell me that it's Tahor, why do you need to have these two rules together? You could separate them completely. So, Hakamashmalan, here's what it's telling you. Avadim, and now this is different. This again, we got to the same point, asking the same questions to Rav, but now the answer that Shmuel is going to give is a little different, and he's going to use this brisa to teach his rule and contradict Rav's rule. And so we'll end up with two different reads of this brisa. Hakamashwan, here's what it's teaching us. Avadim duvyan debnei shvachos. The reason that both of these topics are in one brisa is to tell us that there's an analogy between them. And what's the analogy? Ma b'nei shvachos, when it comes to the sons of a maidservant born in your house, gedolim hu da'osim yain nesek. Only adults make yain nesek. Ketanim ein osim yain nesek. But minors do not. Afavadim nami, I think that the same rule applies to slaves, meaning gedolim osin yayin nesach, ketanim ein osin yayin nesach. So only adults will make yayin nesach and not minors. La puke midirav, because I disagree with Rav. So as a result, we're going to have two rules. Because what does Rav say? To Amarav, Tino ben Yomos, Osa Yayin Nesach. So Kamash Malan Delo. And I say that this brisa is telling us that in fact a minor does not make Yayin Nesach. And so what are our two disagreements? We've got two approaches to this brisa, and we have one that goes with read that goes like Rav, and Rav says minors make Yayin Nesach, and a purchased slave who is circumcised and immersed does not make Yayin Nesach. Okay.
So Rav
And
says
so,
by Tino Ben Yomo does not make yain nesach.
no, Rav says you do. That's
Oh,
the
he
whole
does.
point. That was our beginning.
right,
The
Rav said
Amar
he does.
Rav, Tino Ben Yoma, that's the words that we just read.
right.
It's a right, 1, 2, 3.
The
It's
Breita says it does not. The Tinok does not make yain nesach.
the Rav, but the Rav then said, right, that was why we asked this question from the
Right.
Brisa in the first place. And
Right.
so Rav says that Brisa is all that rule that a Tinok doesn't make Yayin Nezech is only when the Tinok is born to a Shifcha in a Jewish house. And so as a result, it is not a general idolater, but only in that situation where the baby has had Mila, but not Tvila. So that's the one that doesn't have it. Whereas Shmuel's read of our Brisa is to apply that to both a slave outside and a slave inside, and therefore even presumably to an idolater baby itself. That the idea is that an idolater baby who has no intention and no knowledge of idol worship whatsoever, so that person cannot make yayin nesek, and so that's the bottom line. And so as a result, we are now. And so again,
Right.
Rav
Shmuel says the baby doesn't make yain nesach.
well, let me just say. So I'll say. So Shmuel says that minors cannot make yayin nesech, and purchased slaves who are adults can make yayin nesech, even if they've been both circumcised and immersed, as long as it hasn't been a year. We're worried about them because they came from an idolater directly. They were bought from an idolater.
So according to Shmuel, no minor can make yain nesach.
That's correct.
So and minor is defined until what age? Until a chinuch?
Minors defined until
By chinuch.
that particular child understands the rules associated with engaging in idolatry.
So it's the idea of chinuch, basically. What do you understand?
Exactly.
This?
Correct.
So it could be 3 years old, it could be 9, it could be 18, or whatever it is.
Correct. It depends on the complication associated with the idol and the intelligence of the child. Okay, so let's get one more case and then we'll conclude for the day. This was an awesome Gemara here. So, all right, so let's take a look. So, Hahu Uvda Dahavim Mechusa. There was a story that happened in Mechusa. Asa Ovid Kochavim Ayel Lechanusa to Yisrael. A non-Jew walks into a Jewish-owned store. Amar Lahu Islichu Chamra Lezabune. Do you have any wine for sale? Amrule, he said. The owner said back to him, Lo, no, we don't have any wine for sale. Hava Yosef Chamra B'davla. The non-Jew sees some wine sitting in a bucket. Shadi Bey Yadeh Shikshek Bey. So he puts his hand in it and he goes like this and he stirs the wine and he says, This looks like wine. Why can't I buy this? So obviously the Jewish owners are a little bit upset about it. Amar lahu, and so he says, "Hi, love chamrahu, isn't this wine?" So shakle haich b'rizchei shadei ladana. So the storekeeper takes the bucket and he's angry and he throws it back into the big barrel of wine. And so now the question is, what's the story with this wine? Do we say that this is yayin nesech, and now he's mixed it with other yayin, and because it's min bimino, we're not going to say that it's batel, and so as a result, and it's all mixed together, and therefore maybe all of it should not be able to benefit from. And so Sharye Rava Lizabune Lov de Kochavim. Rava said you could sell it to non-Jews. So he says, you can't drink it.
The Jew.
The Jew can't drink
But you
it,
could sell it to
but you
non-Jews.
could sell it. You could sell the entire barrel to non-Jews.
Why
Okay?
not? Why not?
Why can't you drink it?
No, why can't you sell it? It would seem that he could sell it.
You can't sell
Well,
it.
the point is the question is does the whole barrel now become yayin nesach? Because remember, we saw way back when, yesterday, wasn't that long ago, I guess, that if you took the strainer and you put the strainer stuff back into the main, the main basin, and where you're crushing the grapes, then even the stuff that's in that main basin, even before it separates, it's going to all be prohibited because it's all going to be like a wine-like mixture, and therefore it's all, and even though the grape aspect of it is way greater than the wine aspect of it, and so therefore you might say, well, it's rove, we should deal with it. No, we say that it's not bottle, and it's going to be problematic, and the whole thing becomes prohibited to benefit from.
Oh, so
That's
you
what we
can't,
saw yesterday.
you don't
And
make a
so
bel
as a
hana. You say you can't make a hana from this.
correct, exactly. And yet Rava is now saying you can get hana from it because you're allowed to sell it to idolaters.
So so his action, is it unintentional or is it lahachis? This goy.
Well, the storekeepers or
No, the goy is
the
lahachis.
goy's action was unintentional. We're assuming that he did not have any intention to try and make it yayin nesach. The understanding is he's just sort of like saying, "Well, this looks like wine," and he sticks his hand in.
So maybe then it would be permitted because it's unintentional.
Yes, well, that's the question that we're dealing with right now. That's the question that the Gemara is essentially addressing. Do we say that unintentional touching by a non-Jew makes something yayin nesach or not? And so that's where we are. And Rava in the initial position is saying that it makes it prohibited to drink, but not prohibited to benefit from. Iplig. However, the disagreement alei Rav Huna bar Chinana v'Rav Huna brei de Rav Nachman. But the two Rav Hunas, Rav Huna bar Chinana and Rav Huna bar Rav Nachman, disagree. And Rashi tells us Iflig alei, last Rashi on Nun Zayin Mebet, v'lo hayu etzlo be'ir lehitvakeach imo. But they were not in mechuzah, and so as a result, they didn't have the ability to argue with and try and convince Rava of the wrongness of his position.
How did they find out about it? How they know about it? When was it? A day later? A week later? I mean,
we don't know exactly how. That the Gemara doesn't tell us, but presumably they heard about it.
But they didn't have cell phones, did they?
No. The story came to them. Meaning it was like a known thing that this is what Rava had ruled, and they disagreed with it. So it was important for them to
okay, but you want to know what you do now. The storekeeper and the goy are in the store now.
Right, 100%.
And they find out a week later.
100%. The wine has already been sold. The storekeeper has gotten all of the benefit. But now what's going to happen is nafke shipure de Rava v'sharu. And so as a result, the people who publicized Rava's teaching went out and said that it was permitted. Now, maybe this is how they knew about it, because Rava had his publicists publicize the fact that he was his ruling exactly. And when, of course, Rav Huna heard about this, they had their publicists go out and publicize that it should be prohibited. And so what ended up happening? So Ikla Rav Huna braid Rav Nachman l'mechosa. And so Rav Nachman, one of the Rav Hunas, comes to visit Mechoza. And so what is he going to do? He's going to go talk to Rava. And Rashi tells us, now this is Rashi's understanding. Tosfos offers a different understanding. I don't know whether we'll get to it, whether it's just too much detail to get to tomorrow. But in any event, here's Rashi's read. So take a look, and we're going to read basically all the Rashi the rest of today. So keep one finger on Rashi at the top of Nun Chet and Aleph, and your other finger on the Gemara, and we'll go through them together. So Ikla Rav Huna Brei de Rav Nachman l'Mechuza. So Rav Huna goes to Mechuza, And Rashi tells us, La'achar zman. This was not immediate. This happened sometime later.
Yeah.
And importantly, achar shechazar bo. It happened after Rava realized that he was mistaken, and he gave and retracted his ruling. So although he ruled for this particular guy, and this guy was a really lucky guy that he got to sell his wine, he retracted his possession. Shehechziro Abaye al yadei chuvot sheheshivlo, because Abaye asked him tons of questions and he wasn't able to answer them. And we are going to see those questions immediately tomorrow, the beginning of tomorrow. The words that we are going to read basically at the beginning of the day tomorrow, Akfa Nachmani Shmaisisa Umasnisin. That specifically Nachmani, who refers to Abaye, he would, he besieged Rava with different cases that the rulings of Amoraim and Masnisin and different Tanaic rulings. And so as a result, that's the situation where we're dealing with. And it's important to know, Mechoza was Rava's location. It wasn't Rav Huna's location. And so as a result, what was that's an important background, because what happens next? So
He's
now
he's
take a look.
Avodah Asra, isn't he?
Yes, exactly. So Amar Le, end of the first line of Nun Cherem and Aleph, Amar Le Rav Eliakim Shemaye. So Rava says to Rav Eliakim, who is his attendant, listen, Tarok Gale, really lock these doors. Delon Nesu Inshe Denitrid, because I don't want to be disturbed. So let's take a look back into Rashi. Trok Gale, Sagora Delas, close the door. Shemis Yore, because he was afraid, Mirav Huna, that Rav Huna was going to come in and engage with him. Shelo Yikepachenu, because he's worried that he was going to be overwhelmed. Behalachos al divrei machlokosam, because he realized already that he made the mistake and he was wrong and he's retracted it and he doesn't want to have a big discussion about it. So, so what happens next? So, notwithstanding that, al legabe, who is the al who went up to be with him? Rashi, first line of the narrow lines in Rashi, again, keeping fingers both places. Rav Huna came legabe, came to Rava ubaymine, and he asks him, ki hai gavna, like this case, sheyershan, where you have somebody agitate, where the Oved Kochavim, the idolater, agitated biyaino shel Yisrael, the wine that belonged to a Jew, shelo b'kavanas nusach, without any intention for engaging in some kind of libation, la'avodas kochavim, for idolatry. What's the halacha? So that is what's going to be asked of him. So let's take a look, and we'll see back into the Gemara, where the Gemara actually tells us that. Al Amar Le, ki hai gavna mai. What's the story in this situation? So Amar Le, Rava says back, Usser, afilu bahana. You're not allowed to have any benefit from that wine. Whoa! So Amar Vaha. So 1 second. So then and Rashi tells us next. Rashi Amarle Asar Apahana Shechazerbo, because he retracted his original position. He went back on it. 1 second though, v'hamar hu da amar shech ein osa yein nesach. But 1 second, you're the one who said that if an idolater agitated the wine, it's not going to make it yayin nesach. Wasn't that your holding? As Rashi says, "V'hamar hu da'amar tika sharis lezivune la'obden kochavim." You said that this wine could be sold to a non-Jew.
When? When did he say that?
What?
Isn't that what we said earlier? He didn't say that, so why we wondered why.
No.
For a minute.
Well, let's turn back to the page. Turn back to the bottom of the Zion of a bet, and we say Sharye Rava.
Right. But he chazar bo, but now he's changed his mind.
Right, 100%. The point is that Rav Huna didn't know yet that he was chazer bo.
Oh,
And so he's asking, hey, weren't you the one that said that it was prohibited? I mean, that it was permitted to sell this? So, so Rava says back, Amar de Amri Anna. When it comes to what I said, Lebar midmedahu chamra. I was saying that they could sell the entire mixture, but they not the specific piece of what they threw in it. Did I say anything about the proceeds of the wine that the non-Jew agitated? No. I was saying only that they could sell the rest of the wine. Now, in fact, even the rest of the wine should have been prohibited
right,
because of the mixture. But
right.
and Rashi tells us what he was trying to do here. Demei dahu chamra, dahavi bedula, right? That only what was in the bucket is what he was going to say. When it comes to what was in the bucket, miamrinan modina be ditzarach laholich damavlo yam. I agree that you needed to send that money into the sea, the Yamamelach, excuse me, into the Dead Sea. Udmei shar hayayin shebechavis mutter, and it was only the rest of the value of the wine that I was permitting. And now Rashi tells us the key aspect, umishum kisufa. He was embarrassed. And so Ka'amar Haki. He was embarrassed by his original ruling, and that's why he said this about Ihu Kule Shari, because he really had permitted selling the whole thing. Okay, so that is where we are. And now we can understand why Tosas doesn't like this.
Yeah.
Tosas doesn't like this because we have here Rava, who's a great rabbi. We have great rabbis all the time admit that they make a mistake. So why is Rava so concerned about admitting that he made a mistake? Let him just admit that he made a mistake. So as a result, Tosas gives an entire different answer. I don't know whether we'll have a chance to take a look at that answer tomorrow, but that is where we will end today. And right now, we mentioned that Rava changed his mind over time. And for that story, that's the story that we're going to begin with tomorrow. So stay tuned for tomorrow's daf.
What happened to Rava?
So Rava was embarrassed. And now you have to come back tomorrow and you'll find
Get the
out
rest
what
of the
happened to
story.
Rava with the rest of the story. All right. Have a great day, everybody.
You too.
I'm sorry.